Hey kiddos, so I accidentally ended my video by accident by closing my computer yesterday. So I'm just finishing my lesson to sum it up, and then Miss Kelly's gonna do the lesson for today. So here's what you wanna think about. So everyone is a suspect, but we need to think about a couple things, like whether they had the opportunity to actually commit the crime, and did they have a motive? Like, would they really want to do this, and why? So let's think about our people. So we have Mavis Green. So should we be trusting her? Did she have the opportunity? Well, she hasn't seen Wallace Wallace, so it doesn't seem like she could be someone that could be a suspect. Officer Fallon, we've met him so far, but like, again, he hasn't had the opportunity to really meet Wallace Wallace that we know yet. Maureen, the taxi driver, has. So she has the opportunity. She met Wallace Wallace. So we have to think about, does she have a motive? She didn't really seem to even know who Wallace Wallace was. So we have to think about, is she lying? She could be, but we don't really seem like she has a motive yet. And then Mr. Paskey, did he have the opportunity? Well, maybe Wallace Wallace got to the book nook beforehand and then something happened, but we, again, don't really know a motive for him yet. So we can't really see. It's not really clear yet. We have to do some more reading. So let's make some predicting. What would be likely to happen next? We know Dink is on this mystery, and he has this like time list of like, I know he was at the airport, then in the taxi, now he went into the hotel. So I'm predicting that he's going to go into the hotel next to figure out the next step of what might have happened to Wallace Wallace. So I'm going to let Miss Kelly take over. Sorry, I messed up our lesson. Talk to you later. Love you. Bye.
All right, welcome to lesson 4, third graders. To start, I'm simply going to read chapter 5 of our mentor text, The Absent Author. Back on Main Street, Dink adjusted his backpack and led the way to the Shangri-La Hotel. Maureen Higgins said she dropped him off at the hotel last night, he told the others, so that's our next stop. What if she didn't? Josh said, catching up to Dink. What do you mean? I mean, maybe Maureen Higgins wasn't telling the truth. Maybe she kidnapped him. And she's hiding him in her lunchbox, Ruth Rose said. Very funny, Ruth Rose, Josh said. Maureen Higgins said she drove Wallace Wallace to the hotel. But what if she drove him somewhere else? You could be right, Dink said. That's why we're going to the hotel. With Dink in the lead, the four approached the check-in counter in the hotel lobby. Excuse me, Dink said to the man behind the counter. May we help you? He was the saddest-looking man Dink had ever seen. He had thin black hair and droopy eyebrows. His skinny mustache looked like a sleeping centipede. A name tag on his suit coat said, Mr. Linkletter. We're looking for someone. Mr. Linkletter stared at Dink. He's supposed to be staying in this hotel, Josh said. The man twitched his mustache at Josh. His name is Wallace Wallace, Dink explained. Can you tell us if he checked in last night? Mr. Linkletter patted his mustache. Young sir, if we had such a guest, we wouldn't give out any information. We have rules at the Shangri-La, he added in a deep voice. But he's missing, Ruth Rose said. He was supposed to be at the book nook this morning and he never showed up. Dink pulled out the itinerary. See, he was coming here from the airport. The taxi driver said she saw him walk into this lobby. And he's famous, Ruth Rose said. She placed her book on the counter in front of Mr. Linkletter. He wrote this. Sighing, Mr. Linkletter looked down at Ruth Rose. We are quite aware of who Mr. Wallace is, young miss. Mr. Linkletter turned his sad eyes back on Dink. He flipped through the hotel register, glanced at it, then quickly shut the book. Yes, Mr. Wallace checked in, he said. He arrived at 8:05. He did? What happened after that? Dink asked. Mr. Linkletter pointed toward a bank of elevators. He went to his room. We offered to have his suitcases carried, but he preferred to do it himself. Have you seen Mr. Wallace yet today? Mavis asked. No, ma'am, I haven't. Mr. Wallace is still in his room. Still in his room? Suddenly, Dink felt relieved. He felt a little foolish, too. Wallace Wallace hadn't been kidnapped after all. He was probably in his room right now. Can you call him? Dink asked. Mr. Linkletter tapped his fingers on the closed hotel register. He patted his mustache and squinted his eyes at Dink. Please, Dink said, we just want to make sure he's okay. Finally, Mr. Linkletter turned around. He stepped a few feet away and picked up a red telephone. As soon as his back was turned, Josh grabbed the hotel register. He quickly found yesterday's page. Dink and the others crowded around Josh for a peek. Dink immediately recognized Wallace's signature, scrawled in big, loopy letters. He had checked into room 303 at 5 after 8 last night. Dink pulled out his letter from Wallace and compared the two signatures. They were exactly the same. Josh dug his elbow into Dink's side. "Look," he whispered. Josh was pointing at the next line in the register. Room 302 had been printed there. Check-in time was 8:15. "Someone else checked in right after Wallace," Ruth Rose said. "But the signature is all smudge," Dink said. "I can't read the name." When Mr. Linkletter hung up the phone, Josh shoved the register away. As Mr. Linkletter turned back around, Dink shut the register. He looked up innocently. "Is he in his room?" Dink asked. "I don't know." Mr. Linkletter tapped his fingers on his mustache. There was no answer. Dink's stomach dropped. His mind raced. If Wallace had checked into his room last night, why hadn't he shown up at the Book Nook today? And why wasn't he answering his phone? Maybe Wallace had been kidnapped after all. All right, great listening, third grade. Okay, so by now we're getting into our own mystery books as well, right? And I just want you to think for a second about something you do in your life that's unrelated to school, maybe dance or basketball, or maybe you play an instrument or do some singing. And I just want you to think about when things get tricky. For example, in basketball, maybe making free throws is really tough for you. Or in dance and gymnastics, a certain move is really tricky and the other people in your group have it, but you just can't get it. Maybe with your music, playing an instrument or singing, you just can't get a certain song no matter how many times you practice. Well, what do you do about it? We all know the answer. We know that you work even harder at it, right? You don't just give up and stop playing. You don't quit dance or stop playing guitar or never pick up your guitar again. You keep at it, right? And the same thing happens in reading. Whether you're reading fiction or nonfiction, we know that there's going to be books and different parts of books that get tricky for us. We know that as good readers, we just have to learn the strategies to help us through that, right? Mysteries are no different. There are going to be some things in mysteries that can be a little bit more tricky than other typical fiction books. Okay, for example, when you're reading mysteries, sometimes there can be a lot of different suspects. As you worked with Mrs. Groth in the last lesson, you guys already have a list of 6 or 7 different characters that potentially could be suspects, right? Also, there have already been a lot of clues in The Absent Author, and there have been a lot of clues in the mystery books that you're reading as well, right? Something else that happens in mysteries is that the time and setting shift back and forth. Right? So far in our Absent Author book, they've been at the hotel, they've been at the Book Nook, they've been all over town so far, and it's only going to continue to be more places, right? Also, because of all of the conversation happening between the different characters and the suspects, and as all of these people are trying to figure out the crime, there's a lot more dialogue. Remember, dialogue is when 2 or more characters are speaking with each other, okay? So, just like we do with all of our different types of reading, we have different strategies that I want you to give a shot at today as you continue reading your own mystery, and you'll let us know what strategies you've been working on with your own individual book club books, okay? So for example, one strategy you can use when there's a lot of different suspects and characters is what we've already done. You can keep a character list, right? And you've already done that in your Google Docs that you've been using. You've got the character's name and something about them that jogs your memory of why they're important and who they are in this book, right? Another strategy you can use when there's a lot of clues is you can jot down the clues, right? and me and Mrs. Growth have all been working on gathering the clues for this book, and you've been doing the same thing at home as well on your Google Docs. Here, we're keeping track of why someone might seem suspicious. Soon we're going to be talking about the motive and opportunity that the different characters have had to even commit the crime, right? So again, taking those notes with your character list and jotting down clues as you've done so far on your Google Docs are two big strategies. Another very important strategy when the time and settings shift back and forth and characters are all over the place in your book is to simply do what you've done before with any book. Reread if you're confused. Go back and read the part again and picture in your mind the characters being in a bookstore, or picture in your mind those characters being at the hotel lobby counter. And finally, when it comes down to having lots of different dialogue going on, this is one of my favorite ones, and my class especially knows I love to do the read alouds, both of our reading books and just in general. When you're reading, take the time to read the parts out loud. Give the characters a voice, okay? And look for the natural pattern. We know in normal conversation, people go back and forth. I say something, you say something, then I say something to respond. That happens in books too. So when you come to a lot of dialogue, simply take the time, pretend that and bring that conversation to life.
Hi everyone.
With
I would
voices.
like to show the EAs if you'd like.
Take the time to give them their different voices, act it out even in your right where you are reading, okay? And let the conversation flow like as if it were you and your friend talking, or you're acting out the story, okay? So once again, third grade readers of mystery books, we know that whenever we're reading, there's going to be things that get tricky. With mystery books, that's no different. Here are 4 big strategies you can use when some of the parts of mystery reading can get a little tricky, okay? Take the time, and today, make sure you try out one of these strategies and let us know what you tried, all right?